everyone. Welcome on into the Hurt Handbook podcast. And I'm Robert Cardillo. On today's episode, we have a very special guest. He was a finalist on The Ultimate Fighter, and he is a UFC light heavyweight fighting on February 10th at the UFC Apex. We have Zac Pauga joining the show, and it's a little under 2 weeks until your fight. How you feeling, man? Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I'm feeling great. This is the best camp I've ever had. You never know what you're going to get in fight camp, and this has been the best one I've ever had. So I'm feeling great. I'm ready to go put on a show.
That's awesome. And for those who don't know, you're fighting Bogdan Guskov, and it's an interesting opponent because I would think that the UFC thinks there's some potential in him because his first fight in the UFC was right against Volkan Ozdemir, who was in the top 10. So clearly somebody thinks pretty highly of him, and now he's in there up against you. So the first question I have for you really is just what do you think of the opponent in this matchup?
Yeah, he's good. He's a good fighter. Like you said, he came in with a lot of hype. His first opponent was in the top 10. Like he came in with a lot of hype and lost that fight, but obviously the UFC still believes in him, and he's got that a whole country backing him, right? That's the big thing is he's from Uzbekistan and brings every viewer there to come watch him. So I'm excited. He is good, but it's a stylistic matchup that I like that I think leads to me being able to go in and show my best self.
Yeah, man. And this fight, like I said in the beginning, it's at the Apex, which stylistically brings some interesting things because obviously it's a smaller octagon. But my question involving that actually, we've been seeing like some fighters lately talk about how the Apex, they don't get as excited for those events. And I wanted to ask you, since you fought there obviously on the Ultimate Fighter and now you fight there in the UFC, is there like any part of you that wishes that like you could get one of those huge fights in like the arenas, or like do you really not mind the Apex at all? I've always wanted to ask like a fighter what they think of the Apex.
Well, so my goal for 2024 is to fight on a pay-per-view, to fight an arena, to fight on a pay-per-view. That is my goal, but you got to earn it. At least from my perspective, I know Moicano was saying something about it. He's probably earned it. From my perspective, I've got to earn it. I have to go in and become someone the fans want to see, because earn a pay-per-view, fighting on a pay-per-view. And for like I like fighting at the Apex. I've done it so many times. I lived in there in the Ultimate Fighter. It's nice having the PI to like cut weight and do all that stuff. The small cage benefits how I like to fight as well. So I'm not one of these guys that hates fighting in the Apex, but I don't really feel like a real UFC fighter yet. I want to go out and fight in front of a crowd, fighting like with everyone roaring and all of that. So that's my goal for 2024 is to fight on a pay-per-view.
I respect that honestly. And from my perspective, like I would love to see someone like you and definitely other fighters just be able to get that big showcase in front of the arena. So obviously if you get through this fight, get a win, hopefully we'll see that in the near future. But I wanted to pivot real quick and ask you a little bit about your last fight. So it was obviously a while ago at this point, almost 7 months, and it was a very controversial decision. I mean, at least in my opinion, I know you thought the same, and I'm sure a lot of fans
Mhm.
felt the same way. Now, when you think about that fight, like, does it play into this one at all, or are you kind of like the type who is just like, forget that one, on to the next?
No, absolutely. I try and learn from every fight. You have to learn from the wins, learn from the losses, and it's cliche, right? Don't leave it to the judges. Don't leave, like how many times do we hear that every weekend, right? I never truly experienced it. Like when the bell rang in the third round, there was no doubt in my mind that I won that fight. There was no, oh, I hope they see. I was like, I dropped him twice. I took him down. He wobbled me like once at the end of the first. I clearly won this fight. And then one of the judges gave him all 3 rounds. So that has absolutely adapted how I view fighting, how I'm approaching fights. Like I have a lot of decisions because in the usually like coming from a football background, from a sport background, I'm doing what it takes to win fights. And I've totally changed that. I'm trying to get guys out of there because you have no idea what those three people sitting on the side of the cage are thinking, or what they're expecting. Like I won every metric of that fight, control, significant strikes, all that stuff. And then the judges said that I lost. So it's changed everything about my preparation and my game plan. I'm trying to get guys out of there.
Yeah, and honestly, I feel the same way. I rewatched the fight before this too, and like I feel almost even more strongly than I did back then,
Yeah.
just getting a fresh rewatch after a while. And I feel like in MMA, there's a lot of times where fans will say robbery about fights that were just really close, but I don't, I thought you won that fight personally. But from that, like how long did that take you to kind of like get over? Because before that, you had only lost to Usman, and that one was obviously more like cut and dry. This one was very controversial. So, like, did that take a while for you to get over?
It did. It took me a while to wrap my head to get to the place where I'm at now because I don't like just blaming the judges. I don't want to give anyone else like control of my future. But that was a hard one. I was like, what else could I have done other than just finish him? And it's like you have to look like you're winning. You like I did get tired in that fight. That's the my biggest takeaway from it is I was tired. And even though I was landing strikes, landing the more significant strikes, I was kind of stumbling a little bit. I was getting tired. And that was all that I could imagine the judges were seeing and scoring against me. So it's about cardio, it's about positioning and just getting like making it so no one can doubt who won the fight.
I definitely feel that. And kind of like off that point, you mentioned kind of getting tired in that fight, and that made me want to ask you a little bit about Tough actually, because this fight you've had a nice layoff, but in the Ultimate Fighter, obviously you get the episodes week by week, but I I would think the fights are obviously a lot more often than we see on television. Like, can you kind of walk me through that? What the experience was like in the Tough House and how often you were really fighting because you made it all the way to the end, so you had to fight quite a few times.
Yeah, so it's wild. It's a hard tournament. You have to go and I was on tough during COVID. So the first thing was like a true quarantine, a true they locked me in a hotel room and they'd bring me food 3 times a day, but I couldn't leave that hotel room for 7 days. It was a true like locked in jail quarantine. Then you get out of there, get picked by your coaches, you train for a week, and then so you train Monday to Friday, and then that Saturday they pick the fights. They pick who's fighting. For me, I fought the first week. That was one of the main things I wanted was to fight the first week. So then next Thursday I'm fighting. Have that fight. I won it. The other half that didn't fight the following week, and then those guys win. And then 10 days later you fight again. So it's a crazy turnaround and crazy just experience. But like fortunately for me, I was fighting a heavyweight. I was fighting up a weight class. I didn't have to cut at all. I could fuel myself. I could recover. The people that go in there and cut weight, the girls that were there on the season with me, I couldn't have done the season if it was at light heavyweight. I just couldn't have made weight twice in 20 days.
Did fighting at heavyweight like impact you at all in the cage? Like, did you feel it slower or did you feel better, honestly? Because you said you didn't have to cut the weight. So overall, you felt a little better outside of the cage. But what was it like in the cage fighting, like outside of your normal weight class?
So I loved it. I loved it. I felt really good. I felt amazing. And I was honestly like going into the final, I was like, I'm just gonna fight a heavyweight. I feel good. I'm faster than all these guys. I'm just gonna fight a heavyweight. And then I just got touched wrong by Muhammad and went to sleep, right? In a fight that I was winning. And I was like, oh, now I'm gonna cut the weight now.
Felt the heavyweight power, and I guess it's just like, all right, back down to 205.
Yeah.
So last question I really have actually I have a couple more questions about Tough, but one of them related to the house actually. So we had Sam Alvey on the show a while back, and he was on like season 16, which I think was back in like 2011 or 2012. So obviously the sport has evolved a lot since then. And the crazy thing that he said, but it made sense when he kind of explained it because he said you're just kind of in the house. He said it was actually kind of boring to him. So I was kind of curious if you would agree with that or if you had like any other takeaways from the house itself.
Oh, it was absolutely boring. They try and drive you crazy. You can't do anything. You can't have a book. You can't read. You can't be on the internet. You literally can't do anything other than bother your teammates or the other team. Like it's, I actually did enjoy it. I'm a little bit older, but like some of the younger people on the show were losing their minds because yeah, they don't let you do anything. There's there's nothing to do except mess with the other team.
When I was thinking about the question I asked you before about like how often you guys are fighting, I thought about it and I was like, you guys don't have phones. I was like, imagine if they didn't give you calendars and you're just sitting there like the sun rose and set 3 times. Like what
Well,
day
so
is
they take all the clocks away. There's no clocks in the house
really?
because they want to be able to use footage from the entire time, the entire 6 weeks. They want to be able to plug footage in at any point, at any area. So they don't want calendar clock. They don't want anything that's showing a time designation so that they can take scenes that happen in week one and plug it in week six.
That's crazy. I've never even thought of that. That's why it makes sense like from a production perspective when I think about it. How did you guys set times for like when you would train? Would just like the van come to the house and it was go time?
So yeah, they would like we knew that Team Pena practiced first and then Team Nunez practiced second, right? So you wake up whenever you wake up and just a phone would ring. There's a phone on the wall and it's the producer phone and it would just ring. You Someone would pick it up and they just say Team Pena 10 minutes and the van will be there. And then when we would get back, Team Nunez would just know it's their time to go.
That is super interesting, honestly. And you mentioned Julianna Pena, your coach, and that was really the last question that I wanted to ask you about this. When I would watch as like a spectator, obviously on the outside looking in, it really looked like Juliana took a lot of time and effort in truly like trying to make you all better fighters. And there's obviously fighters that we've seen in the past that maybe haven't cared as much what their team is doing and they're more amped for the extra hype for the fight between the coaches. But Juliana, like I said, seemed like she really was invested in all of you. Is so I just wanted to ask you what you thought of her as a coach from that experience.
She was great. She was honestly fantastic, and I was so happy that I ended up on her team because she wasn't like she was literally just trying to help everyone and help everyone achieve their dreams. So she wasn't trying to push like an agenda or like push her style on any of us, right? She's a woman that fights at 135. She's not gonna like teach me much, but there's so much she could help me with, get prepared with, like mentally. Ask me like I thought that they were going to make it a biggest part or a bigger part of the show, but like she brought my own coach in to coach me for the final uh for my final fight against Jordan. Like those are she didn't have to do that. She could have coached me. She could have had no one coach me. Like, but she knew that that was the best thing for me to help me succeed, and she went out of her way to do that.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I mean, I even remember from the episodes that featured your fights, just seeing her like work one on one. Like they had a lot of clips like that. I remember, I think it was the first fight that you had. She was talking about how she would fight you as a grappler because I think your first opponent was more of like a grappler. And like
Yeah.
just little things like that. It was cool to see. And like it's cool watching just top of the food chain fighters coaching and to me, it's a cooler thing to watch when they're actually trying rather than when they're not, because I feel like you
Yeah.
learn a lot more about like how they train. But while like watching The Ultimate Fighter, obviously they tell all the fighters' stories. And one of the things that I always thought was cool about you is you have just one of the more interesting backstories in the sport. I mean, you were in the NFL and the Texans practice squad, I believe, and then you played pro rugby. I think you were a police officer at one point, and then you just stumbled on, I think, into Elevation, which obviously is one of the better gyms in the country. So, I mean, there's just so much that I could ask you from that, but and you kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier, but what did those earlier sports that you competed in and other things that you've done in your life, what have they added to your MMA career today?
I, that being my base is the reason I'm here, right? I turned pro at 32, right? Made it into the UFC in 3 years after turning pro because I know how to practice. I know how to prepare. I know how to get my peak performance. Learning like the moves, learning a jab and a cross, learning triangle defense. Those are honestly like the simple parts of the game. The hard part of the game is getting in a cage and fighting someone and not losing your mind. So the those pieces are what I've brought from my background in sports, just in high performance.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And speaking of like sports in general, I wanted to give you a chance on the platform to kind of give your case in this. So we had an exchange on an Instagram DM a while back at this point, and it was from an Instagram story post that you had. And I forget which teammate it was, but you were at the gym and you guys were debating who the best athlete to come out of Colorado was. And your teammate believed that it was Christian McCaffrey, who is obviously going to the Super Bowl now with the 49ers. And you said, in a humble way, that you believed it was yourself because how many people could say that they were like a three sport pro athlete? And so I just wanted to give you the chance on the platform to kind of give your case there. And I honestly wanted to ask you, now that we've seen what McCaffrey has done this past season, do you still feel that way?
Listen, Christian is a beast and he is a better football player than me. I'm not debating that at all. He would beat me in football, but I'll like me and Christian, we can play football, we can play basketball, we can wrestle, we can fight, we can kickbox, we can have a jujitsu, we can roll, and we'll see who comes out on top after we do the entire spectrum, not just football. He is a better football player than me. I wholeheartedly admit that. The best athlete in Colorado, right here.
Yeah, so, someone needs to set that up. And honestly, I mean, if you win this fight, UFC 300 is looking for a main event. I mean, I know I said this to you on Instagram back then, but you versus Christian McCaffrey, UFC 300 main event, I'd be here for it. Just saying. But I thought that was really funny, and I wanted to talk about it on here just because I thought it was worth giving it to a bigger audience. But honestly, while we're on the topic though, too, 49ers are in the Super Bowl. Do you think they have a chance against the Chiefs? What's your Super Bowl prediction?
I will root against the Chiefs every day for the rest of my life. If the Chiefs win this Super Bowl, I'm done with football. I'm not going to watch football for 10 years. So I'm rooting for the 49ers, rooting for Christian McCaffrey. I do think they have a chance, but I hate the Chiefs. So I'm rooting for the Niners.
I think most of the country at this point would agree with you, just either from the success or maybe from Taylor Swift, who knows. But I mean, I'm a Saints fan. My team didn't even make it to the dance,
Yeah.
so it doesn't even matter
Yeah.
for me.
I'm a Broncos fan. So that's why I hate the Chiefs and then everything else on top of it.
Yeah, I definitely could understand that. Um, One of the other things I wanted to ask you about, and this is a different pivot, obviously, from the topic that we've been on, but for one, I saw that you and your wife are expecting a new baby this year, so congratulations on that. And I wanted to ask you off that. I hear like a lot of fighters say that when they're like a parent and they have children to provide for, that it gives them like a an extra sense of motivation. Now, you talked about how in sports, like you kind of just have that background in knowing how to get like that high performance, but does having that family support behind you, does that give you even more motivation?
Honestly, no. Like I do this for me. If I really cared about wanting to go make a bunch of money, right, it probably wouldn't be fighting. Like I left a good job making good money to do this. I do want to be an example to my kids. I want to be an example to do what makes you happy and trace your dreams and make a living doing what you love. So in that aspect, yes, I do want to be an example for my kids, but it's not like a motivation to like, oh, I've got to win this fight to make money, all these things. It's like I I can make money doing a lot of things. I love fighting though, and that's why I do it. I do it for me and to be an example for anyone. Do what you love and you'll make money doing it.
I think that's awesome, man. Because I see the posts that you have sometimes of your kids at like jujitsu and wrestling and stuff like that. So I think it'll be funny maybe like 20 years down the line if maybe we see one of them in the UFC someday. But The honestly, really, the last thing that I wanted to ask you before you go, because I know it's getting a little closer to the fight, so I didn't want to keep you on here too long. I'm honestly
Mhm.
grateful that yeah, you wanted to come on. So you have the fight February 10th. You said you're going to be going for a finish. Do you have a prediction that you want to give?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you right now, I am looking to finish. I'm looking to get him out there. I'm trying to show my whole skill set, right? You guys have really just seen me strike, so I'm trying to take him down, choke him in the second round.
Okay, submission then. I like that. I like that. Because honestly, when you were on The Ultimate Fighter, I remember I was giving you props for your striking, honestly, because I thought, like, compared to the other
Mhm.
heavyweights on the show, you were very crisp and you had good technique compared to some of the more like sloppier guys on the feet. So I think it'll be interesting to see you mix it up a little bit. But like I said in the beginning, for those who don't know, you're fighting on February 10th at the UFC Apex. The card starts 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And honestly, that's all I got. So thank you so much for coming on the show, man. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Feel just like a